My name's Eugene Hamilton.
Eugene, what is your date of birth?
August 20th, 1938. I was born in Cove City, Arkansas.
Okay, and this interview is for the Prairie Grove Oral History Project, and we just want to be sure that we have your permission to use it for that project.
Yes.
Thank you. Who are your parents?
My parents was Jim and Dora Hamilton.
Okay, and tell me about your family when you were growing up, your siblings. How many?
Well, when I was growing up, I had 5 brothers and sisters. I had 2 brothers and 3 sisters.
And who were they? Tell me their names.
Well, there was Arville and Merle Hamilton, and my sister Betty Henry, who was married to Bob Henry, who was an animal control officer here in Prairie Grove for a long time, and then a sister with the Lee Davenport lives in Farmington.
Okay. When did your family move to the Prairie Grove area?
Somewhere in 42 or 43, the war was still going on, and we moved from Cove Creek up here. We lived at Cove Creek, and we moved from Cove Creek up here. Moved out to the 2-story house up there by Bud Kidd Lake, and lived there for a while, and then moved to Lincoln.
Okay, tell me about your family's business.
Well, my dad was a farmer and a logger. He made ties, cross ties, and mostly sold them. And he used to buy property down around Cove Creek, some of the old government land now, and he would just log that off and make ties out of it and then let it go back to the government.
And what was your part in the family business?
Well, I never was in the family business. My dad passed away before, right after I got out of high school. And so I was never in the family business per se. I went to work for a power company when I got out of high school and worked for them for 40 years.
Okay, tell me about some of your chores that you had to do as a kid to help out the family.
Oh, we had to slop hogs and feed the horses and cows and milk the cows. And, you know, you got up of a morning and you seemed like you worked a half a day before breakfast was ready, you know, but you was ready to eat breakfast back then. It's not like it was nowadays, you know. But we milked cows on the farm. We had 7 or 8 cows. That was your so your cash flow. That's what kept you alive through the wintertime, you know. And then we farmed corn. We planted corn, beans, and just stuff that could be sold at market, and tomatoes. I don't want to forget them tomatoes.
What other jobs did you work growing up?
Well, after I got big enough, I hauled hay, you know, you haul hay for somebody that had a truck. You'd haul hay for a penny a bale, and, you know, work yourself from about noon till midnight every day, helping somebody put up hay, you know. And that's about all the kind of work it was around here for kids back then, you know, or get you a job in a grocery store, which I'd rather been hauling hay, so.
Tell me about your family routines at home, like dinner and dishes and stuff like that. How'd that go?
Well, when I was a kid growing up, my mother cooked breakfast and dinner and supper. And a lot of times in the summertime, she cooked supper when she cooked dinner because it was too hot to fire up, and she cooked on a wood stove. And I remember we didn't get the first stove we got besides a wood stove was a kerosene stove. It wasn't even a gas or electric stove, it was a kerosene stove. But a lot of times, the people back then, they would cook a meal at noon and then leave it on the table and just cover it up with a tablecloth. And that's what you eat of a night. Or a lot of people, they would just make a big pan of cornbread, and you had cornbread and milk, maybe fried potatoes for supper, you know. But we eat 3 meals a day, and we all eat at the same time. And when my mother got up in the morning and fixed eggs, she didn't fry you 2 and me 1, somebody else 1. She went and fried the eggs, put them on a plate, and you got off of them what you wanted, you know. But everybody got up and eat. If you didn't get up and eat, she put it up, you know. It was the way it was back then. They didn't pamper us like we pamper kids nowadays, you know.
Tell me about your earliest memories of Prairie Grove.
My earliest memories of Prairie Grove was somewhere around 45, 46, 47. I can still remember coming to Prairie Grove when the war was still going on before it was over with in 45. And Prairie Grove was a booming little town then. Of course, stuff was rationed. You had these ration stamps that you had to get groceries. My father-in-law, later on my father-in-law, ran a grocery store here in Prairie Grove, and you would take your ration stamps to him and get your groceries, and then he had to have them to replace those groceries, you see. And you come to town on Saturday and the cars would be lined on the streets of Prairie Grove. And back then they kind of vertically parked. They didn't parallel, so you get a lot. And in the back alleys would be wagons and horses and people that came to school. The hometown grocery even had a little pen back behind there, pens that you could actually pin horses up in. And William Giles used to tell a story about when he came to school, he'd ride his horse to the hometown grocery and leave it pinned up, and then he'd walk on up there to school, you know, which was just up from the old Methodist church up there, you know. And we used to kid William about being one of those kids that had a little money because he had a horse ride to school, you know. But that's my earliest memories, and I remember that, you know. And back then, you have to keep in mind, Prairie Grove was wet. They were beer stores, beer joints right there on Main Street, you know. And again, some of my wife's kin folks sold beer there, you know. And that's what on Saturdays, you know, people come to town. Some of them old boys get to wet their snorkel a little, you know, and get pretty happy about things. So, but I remember back to then, you know. And then after, and that had to be around 45. I would have been 45. I would have been 7 years old, you know. So and then, but that war was over at 45, and I remember those things. And I know that if you had an old car, sometimes. I remember one time we would specifically we came to town in a wagon because the tires on the car. You would have 2 or 3 flats. They was old and raggedy, and you couldn't get tires because they were rations, you know. Tires were one of the hardest things to get, you know. So we'd come to town in a wagon. And then I remember when we got a little better car, sometimes we'd bring the wagon because you couldn't get mom, dad, and all the kids and feed groceries in the car. And my older brothers would bring the wagon, and the rest of us come in the car, you know. But a lot of people done that back then. That was a pretty routine thing, you know. But you didn't. Even up to the early 50s, you saw people coming to Prairie Grove sometimes in wagons and horses.
What about school? Tell me about school.
Well, I attended the first 2 years. I attended school at Apple Hill, and when they consolidated those schools back then, you know, and I was in about 2nd or 3rd grade, they started sending the kids, you know, to Prairie Grove, and of course we came to Prairie Grove. The other school, Cane Hill at that time, had a high school, but Apple Hill and Viney Grove and places like that only went to the 8th grade back then, you know. So when it's consolidated, we came to Prairie Grove, and I went to Prairie Grove schools. My parents left here when I was in the 6th grade, and we moved to Lincoln. Then we went to Oregon and stayed for a couple of years, and then we came back. I was in the 10th grade, and then I graduated from Prairie Grove in 1957, which was a good year.
Tell me about the high school. What was it like?
Oh, high school, it was, you know, I talk about those days as being laid back, because really, like today, you know, when we played basketball and football and baseball, I tell people now, you know, you see parents there and they're mad and shouting and what have you. I don't think my dad ever seen me play a ball game. Now, he would question me about it when I got home, but, you know, they'd work till dark, you know, and I just don't ever, and parents didn't get all excited, you know, either you played or you didn't play, you know, but I played, everything was to be played. First football team Prairie Grove had, I played on it. They started that football team in 1955. Thomas Ray Cornwell, T. Ray Cornwell's son, was the quarterback, and I played 2 years. Of course, when I say started in 55, if you graduated in 56, you know, then that's when Thomas Ray and them graduated, and then in '57 I graduated. So we played on the first football team Prairie Grove ever had. We got all of our equipment from they called it University of Arkansas high school up there. They would discard that old stuff over to them, and we'd get it from them. And first year we played, if you want a story, I'll tell you a story on Jim Reef right now. First year we played, we didn't have face guards. We didn't even have a bar on them, you know. Well, the second year that we played football, they got us helmets and they got the bars that screwed on there. And Jim Reef, this was 6-man football. Keep in mind, there was 3 down linemen and 3 people in the backfield. And Jim played right in the middle on defense. And he thought they put that bar on there for him a handhold. We played Midway, Missouri, and the field looked yellow from all the flags they threw from him grabbing the face mask when they come up the middle, you know. But Jim was quite a guy. And let me tell you one more story about Jim Reef too. Back then, you talk about things being different. Back then, you wasn't tough if you had to have water at football practice. Now that's just the way it was. You can verify this. So we would split lemons, take lemons and put a lemon in a quarter of a mouth. We'd have mouthpieces back in. And we was running drills up there one day, and the backs would get the ball and they would run into the lineman. The lineman's supposed to tackle them. And Sam Torrey cut, and he hit Jim right in the stomach, and Jim spit his lemons out. And he looked up at Sam and said, "God damn it, you knocked out my teeth." But I always respected old Jim for that. He stayed in there.
What was the school building, the high school building like?
Well, the high school building, when I got into high school, is the old building that's across from where Bob Henry and them used to live up there now. I think it's a junior high school or something now. They built that new. I don't remember when they built it. The first thing they built over there was the Agri building, and then I think the gym. Then they built the high school building. I know that and the high school didn't have a lunchroom in '56 and '57 because we would have to get in cars or take the bus to go to the lunchroom at the old high school over there, or the old, I believe it is at the old high school.
Tell me about some of your other classmates that you went to school with that you remember.
Well, my classmates, Sam Tyree, John Austin, Sam Tyree, Sister Tyree, same ones, and John Austin, H.B. Hutchins, and Vincent Whitmire. Marvin Foster was in my grade, and 2 or 3 others, and then there was Clydine Tyree, she was in my class, and there wasn't but 7 girls in my class. And Mary Helen Phipps and Mary Helen Pierce. Right now, that's all I can remember off the top of my head.
Twins.
Tell me what stores and businesses you remember doing business with down in Prairie Grove when you would go downtown.
Oh, well, the Crescent, of course, Yeah, and then there was Dude Neal. He had a clothing store. I think he sold Big Smith, and the Crescent sold Levi's, and then, of course, Florence Hill, she had the mercantile shop, and about everybody traded there, And when you went in Florence's, they had when you bought something in there, Viola Hannah worked upstairs and kept the books and took the cash, and when you paid for it, they put the money in this little deal and run it up to her on the string, and she'd run the change back to you. They didn't take no change down at the counter. But Florence, there was a hardware store, and a grocery store, and a clothing store that you could go about one door into the other stores there. There was 3 of them, and we traded there, and we traded with Dude. Of course, everybody traded with the Crescent at one time or another, And then we bought groceries. We bought some groceries down at the hometown grocery. And then there was two grocery stores, one on each side of town. There was IGA, and later on, Ronnie Stone and Guy Sparks ran that grocery store for a long time. And then when they split up, Guy moved and bought a grocery store across the street. So I remember trading with Guy Sparks for a long time. That's.
Tell me about the bank.
The bank was just one of those places that you went in. If you needed money, they had a little piece of paper about that long and about that wide. And they wrote down what you wanted and asked you what you wanted it for. As you got older, if you had good credit and all, and you needed to trade cars or buy a car or something, you just call the bank and tell them, I'm going to trade cars. And Dillford say, well, okay, come in a day or two and do the paperwork. But you went ahead and traded, or you went ahead and bought cows or whatever. And I'm not talking about that I was special. That's the way the bank ran business back then. A number of people would just, call Dillford. And I remember one time, John Everett may have told you this story, but Guy Sparks was a janitor down there at the time. And John Everett was in Oklahoma and he wanted to trade cars or something, and he told him just to call the bank, and it was after hours, and Guy answered the phone. And this banker wanted to know if a check on John Everett would be all right to trade cars, and Guy said, well, I guess it would be, so the bank will loan him the money. But Guy Sparks just told me that story 100 times before he passed away. But
what was Dillford Reef like whenever you talked to him?
Oh, Dillford was good for this community. Dillford was a good man for the community. Now he also liked Dillford himself, but Dillford really tried to help folks. He didn't try to hold them up or string them, not in my opinion anyway. I know it. A lot of times I can remember my dad, but this was back in the late 40s, early 50s, if things get to going a little rough or something, you need $25, $50, and you just go and sign a note. You didn't have to put up nothing or no collateral or nothing, So I think Dillford Reef was a good banker. I think Prairie Grove prospered because of Dillford Reef being a banker myself. But and then of course the other loan officer in there was Sure West dad, they were different. One of them wanted to know everything you was doing, the other just wanted to know how much money you wanted, and that's the way Dillford was, but I think Dillford was a good banker.
Did your family attend church locally here?
No, my mother, I was raised in the Pentecostal Holiness church, and we went to church most of the time in Lincoln. But we did attend this Church of God down here some when I was smaller, but most of the time we attended the Pentecostal Holiness church in Lincoln.
Okay. When you were a kid growing up, what did you guys do for fun?
Well, on Saturday you come to town, and that was always a big treat because you might get a knee-high soda or a Milky Way candy bar. And that back then, that was a treat. Believe you me, it was a treat. On Sundays, if you played baseball, as kids, you just played with grown-ups, whoever, and a lot of grown-ups would just get out in pasture and play ball and things, But then we used to do things like go chickpea hunting, and there's not too many chickpea trees around anymore, But there wasn't a whole lot to do when you was a kid growing up, I can remember when I was 6, 7 years old, we'd take the metal rim off the hub of a wagon and take a tobacco can, flatten it down and bend it, and then we put it on a stick and we'd roll that thing down the road, or we'd get old tires and roll them. I've rolled old tires for 100 miles, see if you could roll them through a creek or up a certain hill, or talk my sister into getting into it and let me roll her down the road, But that's about all the fun we had, you know, until we got up into high school. Got an old car, and even when we got in high school, you didn't go to town, you know, maybe Friday and Saturday night, and that's it, you know. You didn't go to town every night until we got older, you know. But I remember things back then that we think about now, people get every day, you know. I was thinking the other day about planting some peanuts. Well, peanuts used to be, it was something that Dad grew. And most of the time he'd put them out after he dug potatoes and things, you know. And in the wintertime, you'd roast those peanuts, you know, on a cold night, and it's kind of a treat, you know. And homemade ice cream and all that stuff back then, that was a treat. You look forward to it, you know. What is now pretty well a common thing, you know, was a treat back then, at least to us. And you know, when you was talking about going to church, I can remember when I was 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. Going to church was a big deal because that might be the only communications you had with anybody, you know, especially in the summertime. And they'd build these brush arbors, you know, and these evangelists would come back and they would have these meetings, and they might go on 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I used to say it would last until they quit putting money in the plate, you know. But you look forward to those things when you were a kid because you didn't see somebody talk to them every day back then, you know. You was out there on the farm, and the only people you seen was your own family. So,
what did adults do for fun back when you were a kid?
well, the only thing that I can remember was we had a radio. We even had a radio back in the war, because I can remember us all getting around the radio and listening to the war commentators. And then you listen to the Grand Ole Opry on Saturday night, you know. But like I say, going to church and Sunday school, and we went to church and Sunday school on Sunday morning, then we went to church on Sunday night, and then we went to church on prayer meeting on Wednesday night. And other than that, you know, like I say, making ice cream and inviting the neighbors over once a month or something at supper time or things like that is about all they done for entertainment. It was rare. I remember my dad took me to Prairie Grove to see the movies, and we seen the Yearling. And then I can remember him taking me up here to see the movie Shane, which is, I've still got a copy of today. You know, it's a great movie, but they didn't do a lot of things other than just work and try to make a living, you know.
Do you remember getting electricity, or did you always have it?
No, actually we moved to a place over at Lincoln that had electricity. It was already there, and it just amounted to a light bulb and a receptacle to plug a refrigerator in. When we lived down here, even up into 1948 at the two-story house, we didn't have electricity out there. You know, I can remember we had an ice box, and you come to town on Saturday and you'd have to buy 100 pounds of ice in summertime because you just get home with 50, and that's what the ice box is, you know, and then you was out by Wednesday or Thursday. But it was, I don't know, we moved them out there at that two-story house in 48 or 49 and moved into a house that had electricity, and that was a big thing. I mean, that's why I'm not too smart. I couldn't read by them coal lamps.
What do you remember about the Battlefield Park? What are your earliest memories of the park?
My earliest memories of the park was Jackie Clark, another kid that I graduated school with. His dad had a store up there, and they lived up there. And the Battlefield Park decided they wanted to take that store and house. And I mean, there was people upset about it because the Clarks didn't want to give it up, you know, but the park used that deal they got to where they can take it, you know. And that's when the park first started making this move of grading itself up, you know. But that little old store set, I don't know, somewhere down there along about where that second gate is on the left. I don't remember for sure. And then Jackie had a house there. And then the park surrounded that, and they come in and started visiting. That's my first memories of paying any attention to the park there. I knew it was there, but nobody paid much attention to it till then. And this was back in, I don't know, 53, 54, somewhere along in there. I can't tell you for exact date, but.
Did the kids ever go out to the park? What did the kids do out there?
I never did go, and I don't know if they went to the park or not. I mean, we lived out in the country. I never did go, and they didn't have, they didn't have trips that I know of back in, where they bus kids to places like that. But at least I've never on any of them. So we didn't have what they call field trips, Now, after we got up into the 7th, 8th, 9th grade, there was some kids took field trips, but back when you was little like I do now, we never did have any.
What other stories can you remember about Prairie Grove maybe that I hadn't thought to ask about?
Well, did you know Dick Bain used to buy warts? Dick run what they call a filling station down south end town, down there about where the Pizza Hut's at. And he sold gasoline, kerosene, motor oil. And I think he had a soda pop deal in there. But anyway, kids come to town having big old seed warts on their hand. Now, that's the truth. And Dick would take a penny out of his pocket and tell the kid he wanted to buy it. And he'd rub that penny on that wart, tell that kid put the penny in his pocket and don't look at it for, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 days. Sure enough, that wart would go away. Now, Dick Bain is Andrew Bain's grandpa, But some people believed Andrew or Dick bought the warts, and some people thought they was going to go away anyway, So I don't know which was the fact, but he actually bought them warts. But did you know about the time the city, I was talking about vertical parking a while ago, and the city passed an ordinance that people having brakes on them cars wouldn't stop them, so they just run them up on the curb, and let them sit there. And the city passed an ordinance that you couldn't park them cars on the curb, and there's going to be a $1 fine. So they hired Luther Jones to check that and write the tickets. The problem was Luther couldn't read or write, so you had to write your own ticket if you parked your car on the curb. And he gave guys parked and got guys parked down there one time. Old guy said, "Well, I ain't writing myself no ticket," but Luther couldn't read and write, but they hired him now to pass out them tickets.
Do you remember whenever the water tower fell?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about that.
Okay, first of all, the city fathers meant to keep that quiet. They wasn't going to tell people too much about that. And it was on Sunday morning. And I remember I wasn't going to church that morning. I had some cows, had no place to rent. I was fixing to go out and check those cows. And all of a sudden the power went off. So I circled down. There was a big crowd gathered down there. And I drove down by, and the water tower was laying across the Crescent department store. The big old tower. And so I drove up and I asked what was going on. And they told me. And they sent a guy by the name of Roy Easter who done logging. Told the city, if you take them bolts out there or move something, that's going to fall the wrong way. And they told Roy, we know what we're doing, And the old man, Jim Smith, had his old wrecker there. He was fixing to tie on that thing, and it's a good thing he didn't know telling where that wrecker was stopped at. But they said after the dust settled and everybody got their breath, they heard old Roy say, "I told you so," But that was, they didn't keep that quiet very long. But that happened on Sunday morning. But that happened right after you may know this story about they going to free flow that water in from the lake out there, and they miscalculating the grade, and they got out there about where Don Wayne Hall's place is and just pooped out right there, So city didn't have very good luck back then.
What other stories can you think of that I haven't thought to ask? I'm sure there's more.
Well, of course, I guess you know about the jail and Love slaughtering. Love City's mattress fire in there. And they said that the smoke was, just boiling out them bars and things. That little jail's back there and kind of isolated back in. There wasn't a bunch of that stuff built back there. You just kind of growed up weeds, things like that, and grass. But they said when they got to it, Love was down on his belly trying to draw in all the fresh air under cracking the door down there he could get to, And then another story was, when I wasn't old enough to see this, another story was they got him out and got him on the back, and they's a pumping his chest to get there, and said it kind of looked like a choo-choo train, the smoke puffing out of him. But Love Slaughter was a good guy, but he was just one of those that first him and Dick Cavett didn't get along. Dick Cavett was the actually just a night watchman or something, but he did have the authority of constable or something, and he'd get Love about every week. I never did spend a night in that jail. My older brother did. Now that upset my dad. I remember that. that went on for about a week before he got over it. Orville got over it the next day. That jail is. I can't remember if there was one room or two rooms in that thing, but I know it didn't have no bathrooms. Just had a pipe run outside. I think it's still that way today.
Do you remember when they built that jail?
No, I do not. I know that the first time I went to Prairie Grove, to remember going to Prairie Grove and all the jail was there then. So it had to be built back in the early 40s or late 30s or somewhere in there earlier than that, but I do not remember when they built it. I just remember that when you went into the back alley, the only thing back there then was the jail, and there was a little storage building, the Southern Home back there, but then the rest of it was just kind of in, fields and things, and that's where people would, tie their wagons and horses up under the shades and things back there. But no, I do not remember when that was built. In fifth grade, there was 5 sets of twins. There was me and my sister, the Tillmans, Merlin, Geraldine Keck, and the Harrises. And then there was a set of twins, a boy and a girl that was kind of transit, moved in here. But in the 5th grade, Miss Connors was the teacher, there was 5 sets of twins. But I've tried to think of those other sets of twins' names, but I guess most of them still alive. I know the Harris twins is still alive. Willard Tillman's dead. Willis still alive. The Keck twins, both of them's alive. Me and my sister's alive. So I guess, come think of it, as far as I know, Willard's the only one dead out of 5 sets of twins.